So it's time. I'm going to mute everyone, and Yvette, you'll get muted too, but then I will unmute you. And so I'm going to unmute everyone just so that as we're getting started.
Oh, there we go. All right, where are you?
Oops. Let me just do that. Okay, good. We're all muted. And then I want to welcome you all to this webinar on learning environments. And I'm Linda Braun. I'm the YALSA CE consultant. I'm very happy to have you here for the next hour as we talk about this topic with Yvette Garcia. Yvette is from the Chicago Public Library, and I'm going to have her introduce herself in a moment. But one thing I wanted to mention is that if you don't have the chat open, it's at the bottom of the screen. If you hover, you should be able to see it. Lots of times people like to have the chat movable on the screen so it's not over something. And if you would like to do that, you can check, and there's a left arrow at the top of the chat, a down arrow. If you click on that, you can pop out the chat, and then you'll be able to move it around if you can't already. So that's often useful because sometimes people like to see the slides in one place and the chat in another place. We invite you and would love to have you chat throughout the session. It's always really exciting to have the conversation going on while Yvette, in this case, is talking about the topic. And then there will be times for you to ask questions and have an open conversation with everybody. But feel free to talk to each other, me and Yvette, during the session. I will keep track of questions for Yvette and make sure they get answered. And I think that's it for all sort of housekeeping stuff. So welcome again, and welcome Yvette. I'm going to let you take it from here.
All right, so my name is Yvette Garcia. I am currently the U-Media Manager for Chicago Public Library. That means that I manage the U-Media space here at the main location. I've been a librarian with Chicago Public for almost 15 years. And before that, I worked in one of the northern suburbs of Illinois in the Round Lake area, helping create the teen area there as well. So I've got some experience working here at CPL in the branches, in a few different branches, at the flagship U-Media and also in suburban locations. So lots of good YA experience there. Today we're going to be talking about learning environments, both in informal and formal learning opportunities. But before we get started, I think it's important that we all are on the same page when it comes to learning environments. So we have to think about what makes you feel welcome, what helps you learn, how we can ignite learning. Think of this as perspective. How do you get your work done? How do you learn? What do you prefer? Do you prefer a quiet space, or do you prefer to have music in the background, or do you prefer to have lots of things going on and you're multitasking? These are some of the things that we have to consider when we think of welcoming learning environments. And I'm going to let us go ahead and chat for a little bit so we can respond to some of these questions, because I want to listen to you too, even though I can't physically listen. I like to be comfortable. Yeah. Might change. Yeah, definitely change in different situations. Anybody else want to comment? White noise, low music, definitely. Yeah. What about the furniture? Do you guys like comfy chairs, or do you like, just like a desk where it's more formal? Yeah. Have you? Oh, yeah, definitely. You can tell that we're all over the place. Food, yes, food is important. Well, as you can see, we're touching base on all the characteristics of a good learning environment. There's the internal and the external. The external are like a well-defined space. Is it an enclosed room? Where is it in the library? What kind of furniture? What kind of decorations do you have? I like to be surrounded by plants, so the more nature, the better. What kind of resources are in there? Are there computers there? Tables, chairs, can those be moved around? Internal, that's where we get to the quiet space, or is it loud? What kind of programs or activities are taking place in the space? Ownership, do you feel that this is your space? And I keep referring to us as users, because we as librarians need to use the space as well. And if we think of it that way, we actually can put ourselves in place of the teens and empathize with what kind of things they may be feeling when they walk in. Is it busy? Is there somebody there to welcome them into the space? Or do they just kind of have to walk around and wander and try to figure out where to go for stuff? What kind of experiences have you guys had? Again, giving you guys an opportunity. Yes, that is true. Not all teens need the exact same thing. How do you balance that within a space? That's truly challenging. Does anybody else have comments about experience? Yeah, the size of the teen space can definitely impact on the activities that go there. Ooh, yeah. It's those shared space. Nice. Okay. Usually we start thinking more and more about this environment when things go wrong. As was pointed out earlier in the chat, you know, it's getting used primarily by adults. Somebody's teen space, I lost who posted it, was getting used primarily for adults. You know, I mean, if it's out in the open and the teens are still in high school, that might be fine, but is there somebody that walks around to let them know at 2 or 3 o'clock this is a teen space and they'll need to move? If not, should there be? These are kinds of some of the policies, procedures, and protocols that you may want to consider. Also, how is this information being shared within the library's bigger structure? You know, if there is a separate closed room, is that staffed all the time, part of the time? By who? Is it just the teen librarians? Is it the teen librarians plus other staff in the building? And what about if something happens? You know, or theft, or maybe there's you know, a noise complaint or something like that. How are people dealing with it? How are these challenges documented and informed? What kind of communications going on, not just within the teen department or staff members serving teens, but with a greater institution? Yeah. Carter, what happens if you're not there, if you've got a day off? Does somebody else jump in? The teen library space is hidden behind a nook and corner. That's true. The location also is important. I've seen some teen spaces that are offshoots of children's spaces. So sometimes teens actually have to go through the children's department And that's not necessarily, sometimes 16 or 17-year-olds may not want to walk through the toddler spaces. That's definitely something to keep in mind as well. Yeah. I think when it comes to learning spaces, the idea I really want everybody to come away with is the fact that there are a lot of different factors that go in, and it's not just about what's in the room, the furniture, the tech. There's so many other factors that need to be incorporated or considered. Some of those factors can be, staff expectations and roles, as I said before. Who's going to be working in the space? Are they going to be programming primarily, or do they also have other responsibilities such as collection development or whatnot? Also, what are your team expectations? Are there signs posted with, codes of conduct or behavioral expectations? Are there volunteer opportunities for teams to be actively engaged in the space? We're talking about learning, and that has, obviously that involves programming and activities and materials. Who puts that out? Is it team volunteers? Is it staff? Who puts that away? Who leads these programs? There's an opportunity for co-led, staff and team programs, and that's where a lot of the learning takes place. Because not only are the teams learning specific skills or activities, but their staff are also modeling behaviors of how to teach or how to share knowledge. The X factor, library security. I always call this the X factor because some libraries have the benefit and the luxury of being able to hire their own security or monitors. And you're able to make sure that those staff members are team friendly or understand that teams are at a certain developmental stage. And some institutions have contracts. And so you're hoping that you have security staff members that can be that are team friendly or can be mentored. So that way, when I've worked with security, it's very off-putting. Yeah, we've got to be really careful with security. Welcoming teams into the library isn't just about what takes place in the teen space or center or department. It starts at the moment they walk in the door. And that's definitely something that needs communicated system-wide or institution-wide, which is why the Y factor is always policy. That this kind of policy, library policy, can be somewhat discouraging for teens if it's very restrictive. Think of something as simple as getting a library card. Some teens, especially in a big city like Chicago, will very easily have a photo ID, but other areas may not. So, yeah. So I'm trying to read the chat as quickly as I can also.
And Yvette, if it's
yeah.
easier for you, I can keep track of the chat and you can keep going and I can interrupt you if need be. How's that?
That's perfect. Better? Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Where was I? Oh yeah, policy implications. Policy isn't just about the rules or the procedures. It's also about making sure that serving teens and creating these learning environments and being pro-teen is something that is institutional. So everybody welcomes and everybody knows that this is an expectation. These are our future constituents. They are patrons, they do use the library, and that's something that you are welcome to, that we want to welcome them into the library. You need to have admin buy-in, you need to have management buy-in. And it starts there, and it makes it so much easier for teens to have, ownership of the space for staff to actually go through and do what they need to do to encourage teen participation and teen attendance. Speaking of staff, staff is actually one of the key factors, one of they are essential in learning spaces. You want to make sure that staff connect with teens. You want to make sure that they have the skills needed to teach, to learn, to communicate. They need to also like blend in with the other library and make sure that they can make friends with other departments. I do recommend having clearly defined roles. I know that some libraries are now shifting more towards, there's collection development librarians and then there's programming librarians. So that way the programming librarians or staff can actually like dedicate their time to planning and implementing programs, and as well as developing partnerships and community contacts. I'm not sure how I personally feel about that, but I know it definitely helps with the workload. And then expectations, staff need clear expectations so that way they know what the priorities are. So when you're thinking about hiring additional teen people or adding to your department, and this includes presenters or partners. You want to think about those personality traits that you should be looking for. What are their specific needs? If you're looking for somebody who does STEM ed, are you looking for more like a programmer or an engineer or more of a scientist or kind of more along the social activist that's going to bring science into positive change? Are there any questions so far?
I have a question, Yvette.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, as you were just talking about that, and I have a little obsession with job descriptions at the moment, but I'm wondering if there is a correlation between policies, job descriptions, and learning spaces, right? Is there something you could say about that? So when you say you're looking for certain skills, qualities, knowledge, strengths, whatever, so it's not just thinking about the physical space, which you've already said, but it's also thinking about who works in that space in order to create a learning environment, and then job descriptions have to reflect that.
Correct. Okay. Yeah. So it's one of those things where, as I say, here in Chicago, we say they come for our stuff, but they stay for the people. The technology, the video games, whatever you have in the room to attract teens will attract the teens. But it's the staff that's actually working in those spaces that'll keep them coming back. And it's the staff that's working in those spaces that'll develop those relationships. So you want to make sure that the staff that working there have that connection, the personality, the soft skills needed to work with teens, the patience to teach, the experience, so that way when a teen says that they're interested in X, they can connect it to Y, and then maybe Z based on their personal experience. You also want this person to get along well with others, so that way they can work with other people, other departments if needed on special projects. That's how, these are the people that we want working in our spaces. And those of you that are working currently with teens, you most likely have these clearly, personality traits. And it's nice when you go to a job and you have a very clearly defined role saying, okay, I am responsible for teen programming. And in order to have that, you need those clear job descriptions. And that starts with policy. That starts with, procedure. That starts with expectations. If you're going to be responsible for both collection development and programming, then everybody needs to be on the same page. you know, how many hours or what portion of your job is going to be on programming and what's going to be on collection development. This impacts learning because if you're supposed to be programming and teaching and spending time, but you're not, you're in the room but on your laptop trying to get a book order done, it distracts, or you seemed busy and unavailable. It all comes back to kind of your presence in the space. If you're just, yeah, it's that body language that teens are learning to read. And how do we make ourselves available when we're just, you know, staring at a screen, typing. I know personally, I've heard teens say that, oh, it's like, oh, we know you're at the desk, but you look busy and we didn't want to interrupt you. So that's how it all ties back to policy, because you have those expectations. So that means that, you know, you've got to be scheduled for time in the morning when the teens aren't in the space. It all kind of trickles up and down, kind of like the chain of command or in management. Does that answer your question, Linda? You're muted.
Oh, sorry. Yes, it does. We often think about space. You've been saying this all along as the space, but there's all those other things. And then you also, as you were just talking about that, it also means if you're going to create an informal learning environment, then you also need to give yourself time to do things like this so that you can learn how to do everything. And actually, there's another question about hanging out. Where did it go? How do you approach the possibility that teens might prefer to hang out in spaces where there aren't adults / staff? We don't currently have staff in our teen space, small library, but I'd love to hang out in there with a laptop and work while also being in the space. I suspect teens would be less likely to come in if I'm there. Thoughts about that?
If you've got to find a way to make yourself available to the teens, to connect with them, so that way they don't see you as kind of like creepy. Most of us have some kind of badge or whatever, so we're staff. If it's an enclosed space, you can just set up like a desk area so they can see that you're just there working the desk or available so they can interrupt. There's ways to present yourself as kind of like the person on duty, so that way you can work. And so, but I personally, I don't think that, that teens should be turned off by that. It's having that strong rapport. It's presenting yourself so that way you're not lurking or kind of like, oh, I'm not supposed to be here. It's like, just create a condition where you are supposed to be there, and maybe just say hi or let me know if you need anything, and then continue on with your work, so that way you can keep an eye on things. But that's that. I mean, in my space, sometimes I'll just have lunch by the desk real quick, so I can just kind of observe to see what's going on and what are the interactions, and then, you know, go on about my day. It's not an issue.
And I'm just going to add one thing, and I think that if you can even go, and if they're working on something, you can just say, hey, what are you working on? Or also, if they're doing something that you're curious about, you can say, hey, can you show me how you're doing that? And, you know, this goes back to what we talked about in last month with interactions with teens, but they can, learning space doesn't just have to be the library staff facilitating learning for the teens can facilitate learning for staff, right? So, correct. Right. So then if you say, hey, show me what you're doing, teach me how to do that. That's a great way to start building those relationships.
Right. You know, also one trick that I love is just having a couple of materials out for them to tinker and play with, little puzzles or maybe some, you know, little bits or something like that. And it's tinkering, but it's also conversation starters. So you can say, hey, have you checked this out? Look at this. This is what this does. Or do you think you can solve this puzzle? Again, it's just trying to find an informal, really light touch way to connect with them and start a conversation. So you've got to feel that, you know, you're there for them, even though you're just kind of sitting back, and maybe not directly leading a workshop or whatnot. And since we're all getting ready to talk about spaces, and I know somebody had already mentioned that their space is super tiny and that's a challenge. Spaces come in all shapes and sizes. One size does not fit all. I've shared some spaces for here from Chicago Public. The two lower represents 2 branches that have more kind of open space. Our Chinatown location is actually located on the 2nd floor of that branch, and it's next to the adult area. There is a curtain that is supposed to help with noise, but it's a curtain. So yeah. Our teen space or tween, I should say, space at the Lozana branch is actually in the front of the building, kind of like along the entryway, along the windows. And it's beautiful because they've used Post-it notes to create pieces of art along the windows. But this was never intended to be an active space. So the noise echoes and carries. And it's not very big at all, but it's very long. We do have some spaces that are separate and enclosed. One is this kind of almost in the circular semicircle, and that is at our Humboldt Park location. And then the last photo on the upper corner is actually the size of almost 2 small offices, and that's at the back of the yards. But that works for them because as soon as it turns nice out, like it did this past couple of weeks, they start going on field trips to explore the city. So again, teen spaces doesn't necessarily have to be a separate room. It could be a nook, a corner. I know that several of our locations are currently looking into shifting books around, eliminating shelves, to try to create little teen lounges. When I was working out in the suburbs, I had a small teen booth, and that was it. I had a booth. I had a corner with a booth, and that was the teen area. As I started purchasing additional materials, it grew. But again, I started with just a little corner. Teen spaces don't happen overnight unless you have lots of funding and a really beautiful renovation project. But even those take up to a year from design to completion. So be patient. The space, the physical room, make it work for what you're going to be doing. Speaking of what you're going to be doing, you know, I touched upon some of this earlier. Workshops, programs, and they are a key element of what the learning environment is going to look like. You know, are there weekly workshops, or is it completely like open shop or open lab type of programming? How many people are working in the space doing specific programs? What do those programs look like? When I first, one of the first things I noticed in my space here at the Superior Washington Library was the fact that we wanted to expand in STEM programs, but we didn't have a sink. Now, we wanted to experiment with water, and we wanted to have some plants, and we needed a sink. So I was fortunate enough to attend ALA, and I found a vendor that did that does provide portable sinks. So we were really fortunate enough to receive a grant, and now we have a portable sink in the space. But again, this means that now we've got this hub of activity, and I need to figure out how to deal with water. And and running back and forth to fill the tanks also. So it's in order to get this thing, I also had to talk with building management to figure out what was okay and what was not. And that goes into, organizational expectations and workflows and routines. Because if you're going to be programming, that means you're not getting other things done. You're going to be actively engaged with teams. That means there's not time for fulfilling reports or collecting development. And, does that fall on other people, or is that something that, okay, that means extra hours need to be dedicated? This position should be full-time, not part-time. When it comes to programming, it goes back on to staff expectations or qualifications that we just talked about. If you're going to have a large digital media program with green screens or audio recording, then you need staff that have background and knowledge in those areas as well. If not, that means they need training, and that means that it impacts workflow, routine, expectations, because if they're, time management is key. Time management is key, and part of it is also making sure that they've got time away from the space or the teams, the quiet work time, so that way they can reflect, they can do everything else that they need to do. I think my greatest challenge right now is the fact that as managers, so much of my role is administrative. So I'm in an office, and my office is on the 5th floor, where my space is on the 1st floor, which means I need to physically make time to run back and forth, so I can see what's going on in my space and actually see my people. And again, that goes into workflows and routine. That's part of my workflow and routine is I make sure that every day I go downstairs to touch base. And that gives me a chance to look at the programs, and that gives me a chance to reflect. As practitioners, if you have to, programming takes a lot of time. You've got this 1.5 to 2 hours of the program. You've got the time before and after that you need to set up and clean up. Then you need the time to plan the actual thing and reflect upon it. So, I mean, if you want a welcoming space, you have to give yourself time for these things. Otherwise, you will feel rushed or stressed, or your program may not go the way you want it. And that mean again, we're going back to body language. If you feel stressed and you're just like, oh my God, teams will pick up on that. So you need to be kind of like prepared. Give yourself the space and the time for that. So that way when you're engaged with the teams, they actually have a positive experience with that. They have no idea what you had planned. They could, as long as what's going on is welcoming and wonderful, they're good. They're good. And that leads into what it means to engage teams. It's through programs that we build those relationships. It's through those interactions that we have at the desk. It's not just one factor. It's a combination of all factors. You put it all together, and that's what creates this learning environment. It's not just the programs that you're teaching or the tech that's involved in it. You have to have good teachers. They have to connect with teams. You have to have an environment that's flexible, both for for the team to, concentrate and focus on what's going on with enough background noise that the team that does need a little bit of that white noise can also learn as well. And then you have to find that balance so that way one doesn't distract the other, or there's not this conflict between spaces. How you do that? Well, there is no one right answer. You just have to figure out what works for your particular location, for your particular library. That goes into organizational culture and what fits your needs. Are your teams more into science and tech, or are they more into, Comic-Cons and superheroes? That's going to affect what you have in your space and what kind of programs and what kind of individuals you want. It comes back to what works best for you and your teams. You need to get to know the teams, which is, something we all do as basic librarianship, getting to know your community. Is there any questions?
I have a bunch, but I'm gonna wait and see questions. But I'm just seeing, so people are talking a lot about the different programs they do and getting teens to help out with the programs, and then also talking about cross-pollinating the programs, both with having teens help out, but other staff help out. That's really interesting too, to think about how you said something, skills, scientists, whoever, to come facilitate the program. But I keep thinking about, as you were talking about that, I keep talking about Cheryl Eberly in Santa Ana, California. And she, when she started her teen activities, she particularly worked with staff and connected teen interests to staff interests. And so there was one staff member who was not very teen friendly, but that staff member was an awesome baker, and there were teens who were really interested in baking and cooking and all that stuff. So she had that staff member do a learning program with the teens who were interested in that. And that staff member became teen interested. It was a connected learning experience for the staff member, right? Because she got to talk about things she was interested in. Teens learned something and everybody won. So I think that's a really interesting thing too, to think about the skills outside of the department. We talk about going to experts outside in the community, but even experts in the library who can work with the teens, right?
Right. It's hidden talents. There are hidden talents within your staff all over. You'll never know. You talk to the tech services people. Tech services people, the ones that catalogers, they've got some skills. Yeah, they definitely have some skills. Yeah, working with other staff members, definitely helping.
Yeah. And then, so there was that. And then can you talk a little bit about the idea of bringing in other people to facilitate learning in your learning space?
Yeah. Excuse me. We've had a large success in bringing in quote unquote experts. Sometimes it's an artist, a visiting artist. Sometimes it's partnering up with other community groups or orgs and having them host a workshop. We've done it two different ways. First, we've had somebody pair up with somebody who's already working with a group of teens. And so the relationship's already established, and it's just incorporating them into that relationship, into that routine, into that program. So that way they can do their thing. Whether it, and sometimes it's very kind of formal in the sense of like, today we're gonna have, XYZ come and do ABC with us. And other times it's just, oh, this person's gonna be working with us for the next few weeks. This is kind of the stuff that they do, especially if this is good for artists. And then the teens and the adults can go ahead and explore something and create something together. One of the things that we do, that I do as a manager, is I try to meet these people ahead of time just to make sure that they're like team friendly. And because sometimes there's this, even though we're a library and we're an informal space, there's this expectation of having formal classes within the library, like we do for adults, where there's a registration and an expectation that, you know, these 10 kids are going to show up for, you know, 5 weeks to get this one thing done. That isn't necessarily the case in the library. So a lot of those resetting expectations and getting them used to the idea that this is an informal space, that we do work and drop in, and sometimes teams are going to work with you for 20 minutes, leave and do something else for 20 minutes, and then come back to it 20 minutes later. Is something that I think it's important. So having those meetings ahead of time is really, really important. So that way the expectations are set by the presenter or by outside individuals. So that way when they're working with teams and something like that happens, they don't have a bad reaction to it. They can kind of go with the flow and engage teams in a different way. Oh, really? You're going to go do that? And what's that? Oh, that's so cool. You know what? That reminds me of something completely different. And it leads to a wonderful conversation among almost peers. And one of the things that is wonderful is that there's a lot of sharing of knowledge that happens in those conversations. People get to talk about places they've visited, the experiences they've had, the skills they've learned, and that's when the real learning happens. Here in Chicago, we've been experimenting with some college and career programming, and at the end, we end with at the end of our first Saturdays, we always end with a panel discussion, and the teams get to like ask questions to professionals, and within this, by the third, fourth question, it becomes this conversation, and that's where the real meat of the exploration happens. They get to learn about everyday challenges. They get to learn about workplace culture and gossip, and explore different fields and challenges. And they have this insight, the fact that, you know, we might be professionals, but there's still things that we don't know. There's still moments where we get challenged and where we just like, oh my God, I don't know how to do that. I've got to figure that out. It never ends. Not at 16, not at 26, not at 36, not at 46. There's always something to learn. And that's why it's learning spaces are more than just, you know, the stuff. It's about the people and the activities and the atmosphere that you're trying to create. You have to make space so that way these conversations can take place. Yeah. So
that's awesome. Thank you.
yeah, I'm like, that's a good note to end on.
Yeah, but are there other, I mean, people have been writing lots of great stuff in here. So there's a couple of things I'm just wondering about.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna spout a little bit, then also ask a question. So I guess the first thing is, how does everybody, Yvette and everyone else, how is everybody defining learning, right? And because we're talking about learning spaces, what are we saying? You've talked a lot about what it means, Yvette, but I'm wondering what other people are thinking when we say engaging learning environments, creating learning environments. What are people thinking about for that? And then that gets to, I see this has come up a couple of times about the numbers who are coming and getting them into the building. And I think that that's more than the space. That's, you know, building that relationship piece and thinking less about and more about bringing what we do wherever they are and building those relationships. But I'm really curious, what are things that how do people define learning? How do you define learning? Putting you on the spot. hands-on experience, walking away something you didn't know when you walked in. That's great. Yeah, exactly, Lisa. That's a good point. Go ahead, Yvette.
No, I was reading that it doesn't necessarily mean like straight, like I've learned how to do X skill.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's broader than that.
There's so much to say too about the idea of building that relationship so that you can have learning experiences with and for teams. Yeah, being exposed to a new experience, that's awesome. I love that. And really thinking about finding out what the teens are interested in, going to where they are, and having a chance to find out what they're thinking about and like to do. I always tell a story about when I was early in my librarian career. I decided to do a yoga program and no one came. And that was a really good experience for me because I realized that I was interested in something that not necessarily the teens were. And I know you don't all do that, but just thinking about how we figure out what the teens really want and need. Yeah, yeah, Desiree, that's perfect. Can't be exactly, John. There is no such thing as failure.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
I think that's a good point. I think we also need to keep in mind that some teens just need that other space to be themselves. Yeah. And so the fact that they aren't engaged in any of our programs or tinkering and they're just kind of hanging out with friends, it's okay because they're learning about themselves and sometimes they need that space. Mm-hmm. I've heard that from a lot of teens that that their after school job, so to speak, is babysitting their younger brothers and sisters. And so having that other place to go to where they can just be is super important.
Yeah.
And that's not like learning in the traditional sense, but it's definitely something that needs to be highlighted. And
yeah, and I love that idea of Desiree, let them be the teacher. Yeah. Oh, what's Melissa's question? Where did it go? Let's see Melissa's question. Oh, Melissa is mostly at risk, exclusively at risk youth in one way or another, not interested in participating in programs. So Yvette, what do you think? Do you see that?
If they're so busy taking care of their younger brothers and sisters after school, they may just need that space to be themselves. So asking them to participate in a program may not be what they're looking for, and that's not how we serve them. Maybe they want to talk about things, and maybe giving them some kind of like a team discussion group where it's informal and they can just talk about whatever they want is a way to kind of capture some of their thoughts and ideas. I know I had, in a previous life, I had turned a bulletin board wall. I just put up like white paper, left some markers, and let them just like draw or write whatever they wanted. It was kind of like our informal little graffiti wall. And I got some really great like comments and some really great things there about where my teens were as far as, you know, the social emotional learning that was taking place. You know, sometimes they need that other space. Sometimes what we can provide for them is just the support they need to be themselves. So they're not busy doing anything else and they can explore what they want on their own. And it's about having things at that really basic informal level where, you know, maybe they'll tinker with something for a little bit and then walk away from it. It's fine. I wouldn't worry about it too much. And if you are getting pressure from admin or from management, again, reach out to YALSA and we can help develop a conversation plan with administration to talk about teen social emotional learning and needs. So that way you can justify the hanging out time, you know, part of Imago.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you made. I was going to call you Melissa, Yvette, about, you know, sometimes it doesn't have to be a program. Informal learning, our spaces can just be, or formal learning can just be having the space where kids, where teens get to be themselves. So I think that's a really great point to make. And maybe it's through just hanging out and not participating in stuff that they start to feel comfortable and maybe are interested in other things too. Yeah. Any other questions people have? More we, yeah, just let them be.
Yeah, just let them be.
Yeah. And advocate for them. I mean, that's also one of the key things about having a learning environment is you have to be able to stand up for teens and speak up for what they need and why you're doing the things you're doing. Even if a lot of teens don't come, that doesn't mean you're not having an impact on those teens' lives. Anything else? Questions?
Was there anything I didn't say that you want to ask or touch base? I only have an hour, so there's not much I can, there's only so many things I can cover in an hour, so.
Anything else? We do a question a week. That doesn't say we have. You did great, John says.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? Thanks, Jenny. All right. Well, I'm glad this was good. Great. It's always great to see the chat and have people participate that way. You see that Yvette has the slide, the new video that they created. Do you want to show that video before we go out? Okay.
Can everybody see it? No?
Yeah, I can see it. Can everybody see it? Yep.
Yeah, okay. Full screen. And this is something, we're really super excited about this. This was done by one of my video mentors here in the space. And we just launched it on YouTube in April.
Be whoever you want, read whatever you want. It goes on. Place to be if you want to just meet new people. You can meet everyone here. Really welcome. I'm a poet, writer. I make music in general, and I'm working on some right now currently, and I do a podcast. You can basically perform whatever you want. I explore when you don't have the supplies, but it's just yourself to do it. It's fun here. Like all my friends are here. There's a whole bunch of random stuff you can do. Nice things to get involved in. Stuff is really nice. Workshops, video games, chill. I like everything about the media and nothing's wrong. Come check it out.
So that's the video. I can't hear anything, you're muted.
Thank you. I keep forgetting that people are saying awesome, wow, completely rocks. That's great. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah. And it gives you a good idea of the space that I have to manage downstairs and the fact that it's like really large and there's a lot of different things going on at the same time. It's my controlled chaos and I like it.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, Yvette, for spending time with everybody today. Thank you, everyone, for, oh, you're being asked if people can visit your space.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, of course, of course.
So thank you for being with us today. I will get out a recording of, yeah, everybody can take a field trip. I'll get out a recording of the webinar tomorrow to everyone, as well as the slides and the chat transcript and an evaluation. If you need a certificate of attendance, you can let me know and I'll put that in the email that goes out tomorrow as well. Also, in 2 weeks, on Thursday, May 24th at 7 p.m. Eastern, we'll have a Twitter chat follow-up. And so maybe we will see some of you there to talk more about space and learning environments. Thank you all for being here today. Have a good rest of your day.